Hi, dearest listener. This is your host, Dr. Amna Shabbir. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to take a brief celebratory pause. This month marks 1 full year since launching Success Reimagined with Amna Shabbir, MD. In just 1 year, this podcast has grown into a top 5% global show, consistently being listened to in 25 different countries around the world, something I truly couldn't have planned or imagined. According to Spotify, our debut season was more popular than 89% of new shows, and we were named a 2025 most shared podcast with more shares than 91% of other shows. Our top listening countries included the United States, Australia, Austria, the United Kingdom, and Ireland. This year, the podcast was also honored with a 2026 Dr. Podcast Award, thanks to all your votes. At the Podfest Multimedia Expo, this is the world's largest in-person podcasting conference. What matters most to me, though, is why this show exists in the first place. It is to help all of us reimagine success, move beyond what appears to be performative wellness, and have honest conversations about perfectionism, pressure, identity, shame, achievement, and what really it takes to connect with our humanity while going out and doing amazing things. I'm deeply grateful to every guest, every listener, everyone who voted, reviewed, and left a rating to support the show. And to my incredible team behind the scenes, thank you all. And with that, let's move into today's conversation on the power of regret. Do you have regrets, or are you one of those humans who is living by the no regrets mantra? Wherever you fall on the regret spectrum, today's episode explores harnessing the power of regret as an important success strategy. Keep listening for more. Welcome to Success Reimagined. I am Dr. Amna Shabbir, your host on this journey to thrive at the intersection of ambition and wellness. In every episode, I'll help you challenge outdated definitions of success, discover practical tools and strategies for growth without compromising your well-being. I am so glad you've joined me. Let's reimagine what's possible together. I have many regrets in life, things I did and said, and the ones I didn't say or I didn't do. Anytime I might have yelled at my children, it's instantly followed by this boiling hot feeling in the pit of my stomach. What did you just do, Amna? Or maybe it was the time I was deeply depressed postpartum and I didn't ask for help. I truly regret that. Or the one time I played hooky in my high school biology class. Under peer pressure, it was just the one time, but I still regret it. And lately, regretting taking less action surrounding some entrepreneurial goals, and in other cases, taking hasty action that wasn't completely thought through. As a perfectionist, openly sharing any of the above examples with you today might add to my list of regrets. I'm not going to lie. I didn't fully comprehend the power of regret and how it might shape our success until I read Daniel Pink's research and his book, The Power of Regret, How Looking Backward Moves Us Forward. Today's episode is based on his work, which I truly found very thought-provoking. I'm going to be breaking down what I learned from this book and my personal insights into 3 parts. The first will be I will share the results of the American Regret Project and the World Regret Survey. In the second part, we will walk through the 4 core regrets most of us carry, and finally, what we can actually do about the regrets. So let's dive in. Daniel Pink's research through the American Regret Project, which was a massive quantitative survey of more than 4,000 Americans, and the World Regret Survey, over 19,000 people globally, revealed something very powerful and universal. Regret is not the exception, it is the rule. And here are some of the key findings that I would like to share with you. Number 1, 82% of Americans experience regret at least occasionally. This tells us regret is not a flaw and it's just part of being human. So if you are experiencing regret in some way, that's okay. That's totally fine. The second point I would like to mention is inaction regrets outnumber action regrets nearly 2 to 1. And that gap tends to widen with age. And the things we didn't do, the chances not taken, linger far longer than the things that we did do. Number 3. Despite millions of different stories, most regrets fall into 4 categories, which Daniel Pink calls the 4 core regrets. And I found this really insightful to break it down in that way. He calls them the deep structure regrets because they reflect on core human needs and aspirations. The first is foundation regrets, regrets about failing to be responsible or prudent. I should have saved more. I wish I had taken care of my health. Second part is boldness regrets, missed opportunities, not starting the business, not speaking up, not taking a chance. So all the times that you could have taken action, but you didn't. So most of the boldness regrets fall in the category of inaction regrets. Number 3 are moral regrets. When we took the low road, when we didn't live up to our ethics, morals, and values, when we did something that was against any of those things, actions that violated our values. And lastly, connection regrets, the largest category of all of these relationships that drifted. I should have reached out. So these are kind of the 4 core regrets that he talks about. Then point number 4 says, regrets are reverse negatives. They reveal our values by showing us where we feel a sense of loss. And as a consequence, regret can clarify what matters most to us. And lastly, number 5, demographics reveal fascinating insights. People with the lowest incomes had the strongest financial regrets, and people with the highest education levels had the most career regrets, likely because of more opportunities creating more chances for like the road not taken. So what does all of this teach us? Regret is data, regret is direction, and then regret is wisdom. Let's dive deeper into the 4 core regrets. Number 1, the foundational regrets. These relate to failure to be responsible, conscientious, or prudent, which undermines one's need for stability, the foundation. And the feeling is, if only I'd done the work. So what are some examples? Financial health, for example. If only I had started saving for retirement early in my life, I would be financially secure now. The other is physical health. I wish I had had a more disciplined diet and exercise routine. I wouldn't have had so many health problems today. I wish I had invested in my physical health. And I will tell you, as a physician, I got to witness that quite a bit when I helped my patients through these chronic medical diseases. So I got to hear that foundation regret quite a bit. Lastly, education and career preparations as another form of foundation regret. If only I had worked harder in my 20s, I wouldn't be in this dead-end job, or I wish I had finished my degree, or I wish I had left that job earlier. A lot can be kind of analyzed and learned from this foundation regret. The other is boldness regret. That's the second type he talks about. And I found it really fascinating. This stems from playing it safe and not taking a chance or a risk when an opportunity presents itself to you. So the feeling is, if only I had taken that chance. Career opportunities, such as I wanted to start my own business, but I was too afraid it would fail. Now I'm stuck in an unfulfilling corporate job, for example, is something we can think of. Romantic chances are another. If only I had asked that person out on a date, or if only I had reached out to that person. And in the book, he talks about this really beautiful story, which if you read I don't want to spoil it for you, but that was tied to somebody taking a romantic chance. Travel and life experiences also fall under boldness regrets. I wish I had taken that trip before I had children, or if only I had studied abroad, or I would have, done this or gone out and had that experience, which was tied to taking some kind of action. And lastly, speaking up. I wish I had spoken my mind in that meeting instead of staying silent. So speaking up, standing up for yourself is also a boldness regret if you're not doing it. The third type of regret he talks about is moral regrets, which arise from making a choice that conflicts with your own ethical code, as I mentioned earlier. And the feeling is, if only I'd done the right thing. Some of the examples just randomly that were shared during the book involved people's actual experiences with regret that included being unkind or bullying somebody, and people will look back at that and they shared they were still deeply regretful of that. And so other kinds of moral regrets that he points out are infidelity, dishonesty, cruelty or bullying, being mean to somebody in your school years before and still feeling guilty about taking that action. So that's number 3, moral regrets. And number 4 are connection regrets. And these are the most common type of regret and involve the breakdown or loss of significant relationships, whether it's family, friends, a romantic partner. The feeling is, if only I had reached out. So what are some examples? Drifting apart. I wish I had stayed in touch with my best friend after college, but we just drifted apart. The other one is unresolved conflict, which falls under connection regret. I wish I had apologized to my son and mended our relationship sooner. The other is missed opportunities to connect. If only I had spent more time with my grandmother before she passed away. And lastly is unexpressed affection. I wish I had just said, I love you to my parents more often. So that all falls into connection regrets. And that is the summary of the 4 core regrets that Daniel Pink talks about in his work. Now, the third part is what do we do about this, right? Well, the first and open invitation is to realize that I don't know if having the no regrets mantra is essentially the most wise road taken. So I do agree with Daniel Pink's stance in using our regret to help propel us forward. And that's why I chose this topic as one of our earlier solo episodes of this year, because I think that it's really powerful. By doing a sort of regret audit, we can learn so much more as we move forward. Here are the 3 steps that he talks about in the book in terms of helping us process and learn from regrets. So the first step is to disclose the regret. He talks about in terms of relive and relieve self-disclosure. He talks about the psychological power of self-disclosure. By simply divulging the regret, we can relieve some of the stress and emotional charge that surrounds it, which makes space for whatever needs to come next. He discourages, though, which I found fascinating, a warning against dissecting positive experiences, because if you pull those positive experiences apart, you actually diminish them and take away the awe and the wonder and the magic that surrounds them. But he does invite you to, of course, examine your regrets, which then can make space for learning. He also discourages oversharing. He does report that self-disclosure builds affinity with other humans. And of course, we can all see that, right? Whenever I share something that is deeply human with you, even if that was processing a regret, just like we're trying to do right now, you're going to see your own humanity mirrored in me. And when we share appropriately, it connects us. Again, we're not talking about oversharing, but when we share appropriately, it helps us feel less isolated. I was particularly intrigued when he shared a research study showing the self-disclosure measurably improved health, even leading to fewer doctor visits, which was incredible. Some of the practical ways in which we can implement self-disclosure are: number 1, writing about your regret for 15 consecutive days. This helps turn the abstract emotional chaos in your mind into a coherent narrative. Number 2 is dictating your regret into a voice recorder, maybe for 3 days, which again takes the abstract and turns it into concrete. And lastly, talking to another human, but setting a 30-minute time limit maybe, or setting a smaller amount of time limit to avoid spiraling it into brooding, where you're ruminating, you're over-identifying with the negative. But at least this amount of relive will allow for some relief, because you're able to examine the regret without overpressuring yourself. And so self-disclosure is about creating clarity, not getting stuck in that negative spiral. Okay, so that's step 1, relive and relieve. Step 2 is my all-time favorite, self-compassion. Self-compassion over and over again will continue to be one of the core strategies that is so powerful. I talk about self-compassion as a critical component of the Courage Bridge, which is a framework I offer, and I talk about it in my TEDx talk as well. If you haven't heard it so far, please go check out my TEDx talk, Perfectionism Has a Solution. It's Not What You Think, because over and over again, we find that self-compassion is so powerful. So let's talk about self-compassion in context of regret. You have a choice. After you self-disclose that regret, are you going to dress yourself down and be extremely self-critical, or are you going to offer yourself self-compassion? And now it's important, because a lot of times what you are thinking about is self-compassion might be something completely different. Self-compassion is not unmitigated self-esteem. It's not about viewing yourself excessively or indefinitely as a always favorable entity, which can actually perpetuate narcissism, and it's not helpful. And it's definitely not about self-flagellation. It's neither self-criticism nor it is excessive self-bolstering. Self-compassion is so much better. Dr. Neff's amazing work talks about its 3 core components, and I've done a complete episode on self-compassion. You can go back and watch that as well. We'll also link that in the show notes. Self-compassion includes self-kindness, includes mindfulness, and includes recognition of our shared humanity, which those three components, especially mindfulness being one of them, is so helpful and so powerful because it allows us to examine and sit with that regret in a much more productive way. So in the book, he talks about a study in which researchers invited participants to write a self-compassionate letter to themselves regarding a regret. And there were three groups. One group wrote a validating letter that described their regret and their experience. A second group wrote a self-compassionate letter. And the third one just wrote about a hobby, which was the control group. The findings showed that the group that practiced self-compassion improved the most, regardless of whether their regret was about an action regret or an inaction regret. And so after that, he did pose two powerful questions. Does this regret represent an unpleasant moment in your life, or does it define your life? That's really powerful to think about it. And that is also where I would draw on mindful self-compassion, in which you not over-identify with your pain. Does this regret represent an unpleasant moment in your life, or does it define your life? And then the second, if you believe this regret fully constitutes who you are as someone else, because others will almost always hold a mirror and more compassion for ourselves than we do. Think about your friend. Think about a loved one. Think about a stranger. You will treat pretty much everyone else with a lot more decency than you are treating yourself. And that is also critical, again, when you're talking about examining your regret. So the first step was relive and relieve, which was self-disclosure. The second was self-compassion. And now we're going to come to step 3, which I found very fascinating as well, which was self-distancing, analyze and strategize. Now that the emotional charge has decreased, we have at the regret, we have employed some self-compassion. We're going to step into an analysis and strategy. He talks about the power of third-person self-talk known as Iliism. And in the start, he gave the example of what is common between Elmo from Sesame Street and Julius Caesar from Shakespeare. Both of them talk about themselves in the third person. So he talks about applying the power of Iliism, literally talking about yourself in the third person. This technique allows us to create psychological distance. And while some might find this annoying, of course, someone talking about themselves in third person, he points out that for many people, this is an incredibly effective way to step out of the emotional swirl and look at yourself in a more objective light. So self-distancing allows you to zoom out, which is incredible for gaining perspective, reducing emotional arousal, even blood pressure, and break the cycle of rumination. And there are 3 self-distancing tools that he talks about, which I thought were fascinating and helpful. The first is the fly on the wall technique. Look at your regret from a neutral third-person perspective. Why is it so much easier to solve other people's problems than our own? You might have felt that way. Because we're not emotionally enmeshed in their story, it's easy to have this approach of self-distancing. For ourselves, we're too close. Even the physical art of leaning back, so just stepping back, this is something I offer routinely to the clients when I'm coaching them one-on-one. When you're in a situation which requires you to pause, literally, I would invite you to lean back. If you're standing, take a step back. If you're sitting, just push your chair back away from the desk, step away, create that distance. The second technique he talks about is time travel, which is future retrospective. Mentally visit the future and examine the regret from that vantage point. Ask yourself, how will I feel about this regret 10 years from now? I'm really sad about it right now, but how will I feel about this regret 10 years from now? Will it matter? What would my future self advise me to do today? I thought that was really a great way to pause and ask those questions. Research shows us that when people examine their regret from a future perspective, they're more likely to replace self-justification with self-improvement. It reduces fear, it increases clarity. And then the third, again, is the language shift, which I mentioned earlier, Iliism. The impact of Iliism, the language shift, some studies show can kick in less than a second. I found that really amazing. The subtle shift from I to you or using your own name activates psychological distance. And even if you were to go from instead of the third person, even if you were to choose second person, even that is helpful. There's a study by Grossman that found that third person self-talk improved reasoning, emotional regulation, and decision making when reflecting on regrets. So, what he suggests in the book is imagining if your friend was going through the same regret. What would you, number one, tell them with compassion, as I mentioned earlier? Number two, what would you tell them factually, like a scientist? And number three, writing that letter or emailing to yourself using a you instead of an I or a third person perspective, outlining the step that you would wish to take. Or imagine it is 10 years from now and you're looking back at this moment with pride instead of regret. What did you do? And this is how regret can become a strategy. I found these 3 steps that he mentioned are super helpful. In summary, step 1 was relive and relieve, self-disclosure. Step 2 was self-compassion. And step 3 was self-distancing, analyze and strategize. I thought they were really helpful. In addition, he also mentioned some miscellaneous pearls that you can also take, such as starting a regret circle, creating a failure resume, pairing resolutions with old year regrets, exploring self-compassion deeply, mentally subtracting positive events, and adopting a journey mindset, as well as he invited people to participate in the World Regret Survey because that would that would invite you to look at what other people had written and make you feel less alone. And then he talks a little bit about anticipatory regret. He talked about it, well, quite a bit in detail, but I will touch a little bit on anticipatory regret, which is the front windshield. Instead of only reflecting backward on regret, he invites us to look forward through it as well. Anticipatory regret taps into our powerful wiring for loss aversion. This mindset is linked with healthier behaviors, better screening habits, more consistent exercise, healthier eating, more proactive behaviors. And I've personally used this because when I was going through this whole health journey and I was trying to stay consistent and stay motivated in terms of my healthier body goals, and whether it was physical activity, whether it was exercise, whatever it was, I would ask myself to think about, what am I going to regret the next coming months, weeks? What am I going to be regretting? So for a simple example would be, if I would have my late night eats, I was going to get heartburn and then I'm going to feel bad about it, physically feel horrible later on. So that was me envisioning and applying anticipatory regret to then modify my behavior and not have my late night eats. And that was really helpful for me. So I would ask myself, in the future, will I regret doing this? And in the future, will I regret not doing this? But as is with anticipatory regrets, there is, again, caution. Over anticipation can cloud judgment. Regret aversion can often lead to risk aversion. The first instinct fallacy proves revisiting decisions is sometimes wiser. So he recommends regret optimization, not regret minimization. And that's the framework that we just talked about, in which you're really using regret as a powerful learning tool, not as a tool to then just stay in analysis paralysis. And then I would like to talk a little bit about my own reflections when I was reading the book on perfectionism and regret, the intersection of both. Where does this collide and what are some of the things that we know about that? So maladaptive perfectionism, fear of failure, rumination, self-judgment, indecisiveness, it intensifies regret. Maximizers who chase the perfect choice report higher regret even when they objectively make better decisions. And at the heart of it, in other words, one would say, is perfectionism, or the drive for the perfect outcome, can magnify regret because of increased rumination, self-judgment, and sensitivity to what could have been. That means regret and perfectionism often live in this feedback loop unless we use other healthy coping tools such as self-compassion, self-distancing, and perspective shifts. The great regret optimization framework that I just shared, we can stay stuck and be in significant agony because of that, because perfectionistic ruminations tend to linger quite a bit. So regret is not the issue. It's that part that's the issue. So I hope that you found this episode really helpful as you launch your new year. I found the closing words in his book really powerful. Regret makes me human. Regret makes me better. Regret gives me hope. And with this, we'll close our episode for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. You might believe you don't have the time or energy to focus on yourself, but this is exactly the right time to get serious about your well-being. You don't have to do it all alone. I'm here to help. If you enjoyed this video and are ready to take the next step, head over to dramnashabbir.com where you'll find free resources you can access right away. The website link is below. Let's get started on your path to thriving.